So my thing on YouTube has accidentally become talking about influencers who have fallen victim to cults. But today we're talking about an influencer who has been accused of starting a cult, and who, despite having an entire docu-series made about it that she consented to creating, she still denies any allegations that she is a dangerous cult leader and claims that the documentarians were liars who bent her truth.
What do you think happened with Martin Luther King? What do you think happened with Christ? What do you think happened with Gandhi? Look at these people. What's happening with them is what's happening with me.
Meet Mary Teal Bosworth, known online as Teal Swan, a self-proclaimed spiritual teacher, author, and YouTuber with over 1.5 million subscribers. She presents herself as a guiding light for those struggling with trauma, depression, and emotional crises, and has optimized her videos so that anyone who's struggling may type their desperate pleas for help into the YouTube search bar and be greeted by one of her videos. She admits to using specific tags to target desperate and vulnerable people in an interview with Jennings Brown on episode 3 of the 𝘁𝗿𝗄 podcast.
She wants to get her message to people when they're desperate, in dire need. She has good SEO. It's all intentional.
I specifically try to go for tags and things like that that capture that audience. Because when you're in a desperate state, it's not sophisticated. People, like, when they're in that state, they type in shit like, I just lost my mother, what the fuck do I do?
Right.
Literally, that will be the Google tagline. So like, even when we're doing videos, we'll add things like that so that if someone's suicidal or if somebody's just had a breakup or whatever, that's the video that comes up.
Teal was explicit. She uses tags that target people when they're having suicidal thoughts.
So she has her captive audience. Teal Swan claims that she is an expert in human suffering and focuses on healing trauma through spiritual practices. Her most popular videos have titles like how to activate and open your third eye, how to heal the emotional body, how to use your intuition, and how to get rid of anxiety. Once you click, you're greeted with Teal Swan speaking to you softly in front of a green screen, telling you to embrace your emotions.
The alternative is to completely embrace your emotions and your feelings, no matter how painful or uncomfortable they may be.
And for many people, this works. The comments are flooded with testimonies of people who've been deeply affected by the video. One person writes, Teal literally has the presence of a mother. She's so caring and nurturing in a way. It felt like Teal was an angel. Another replies, she's one of my mother figures. I think maybe the second most important to my heart. To many, she's a savior, a gentle, healing mother figure that they never had, a vessel of something larger. Amongst her claims are that she is the reincarnation of 𝘁𝗵𝗸𝗲, an Indian spiritual master and saint, and she is continuing his mission to end human suffering in this life.
Your past life as 𝘁𝗵𝗸𝗲. What was kind of could you say what your intention of that life was?
My intention was to find an end to suffering. It seems to be like an ongoing trend.
But beneath the soft-spoken wisdom and New Age mysticism lies something far more unsettling. Her teachings have been accused of encouraging dependency, isolation, and causing multiple suicides. Her followers hang on to her every word, viewing her as a messiah, but the true cult allegations actually don't lie within her millions of online followers, but within her inner circle, the people who left behind their families, their identities, and in some cases their own autonomy to follow her and live in her commune. She tells them that they are not allowed to have partners, to have children, or to have any relationships outside of the inner circle. In exchange for their loyalty, they are offered room and board and the promise of spiritual healing through their proximity to Teal. Technically, you can leave when you want, but at great cost. It's your Uncle Herman here. I'm still an alpha male, and let's get into the cult of Teal Swan. Teal began her career in the early 2010s. She began by selling frequency paintings. These are paintings of vibrations that Teal claims to be able to perceive through her divine connection to the universe, and you can buy them for upwards of $1,000 and hang it in your living space to absorb this vibration. These are paintings that promise to bring you anything from Christ consciousness to abundance to divine feminine activation. Then in 2011, she started posting YouTube videos about spirituality, trauma healing, and mental health. At first glance, her content seemed like standard New Age self-help. Topics like shadow work, manifestation, how to find happiness, how to find your purpose, and how to find your spirit guide. But if you watch enough of her videos, a pattern begins to emerge. Unlike most spiritual teachers who encourage self-discovery and critical thinking, Teal asserts that she's the one with the answers. She is the divine truth and has access to spiritual entities that you don't. And therefore, if you don't follow her advice, you're resisting the divine truth. Teal claims to have access to a higher plane. She claims to have been born extrasensory and clairvoyant, meaning that she can see metaphysical things that other people cannot see.
I was born an extrasensory. Now, I know that a lot of people like to attack this, but how the hell is somebody going to prove that they're extrasensory, right? You're going to have an issue with that. One thing I would ask you is, how is it that I have the information that I have at 26, 29, 30, and now 33? How do I have all this information? It's because I'm extrasensory. I'm not limited to this dimension or time-space reality.
She also claims that her extrasensory abilities are like a disability because it's such a curse to be able to see the world this way.
My form of extrasensory abilities is not a talent that I've developed. It is a curse I came in with. It's like having a disability. Your brain is normally set up only to perceive the 3D reality. My brain was not set up that way. It's more like somebody on the autistic spectrum. So I came in with this fusion, merging, synesthesia, intense sensory integration disorders.
As a disabled person myself, I must admit I don't love the idea that she's comparing disability to a curse, but she is very adamant that she is a victim of these great abilities and gifts and is being forced to share them with the world and create a multi-million-dollar empire based off of them. She claims to be able to see a person's aura and understand a person's suffering, potentially more than they can understand it themselves. She claims that her expertise on human suffering has not just come from her metaphysical abilities, but also the amount of suffering that she has had to endure as a child. Because before Teal Swan became a spiritual teacher and influencer, she claims that she was a victim of satanic ritual abuse. Now, this backstory is absolutely key to understanding the person behind Teal Swan. It's full of some of the most horrific suffering that one can imagine, and it's also worth noting that many people have attempted to debunk her story. So I'm going to take a moment in this video to give you guys some context about this without going into too many of the gruesome details. So this story begins with the satanic panic of the late 1980s and early 1990s.
Well, Terry, authorities tell us that the most serious or perhaps the most dangerous kind of devil worship comes in the form of underground cults. Most of them are very secretive, usually organizing clandestine rituals in the dark of night. Well, those ceremonies sometimes involve the sharing of animal blood to gain power, they say, but cult members believe their strength really comes from secrecy.
Satanic panic was a phenomenon that occurred in the United States, a large part of which occurred in Utah and Southern California, and can be traced back to one particular therapist known as Barbara Snow, who used a technique called memory regression to coax children into admitting that they had been victims of satanic rituals and had witnessed atrocities such as kidnapping, cannibalism, trafficking, torture, the sacrificing of animals and children, and sexual abuse, all in the name of devil worship. It all revolves around the idea that satanic abuse will have happened to you or your child, but because of the trauma of their memory, your brain has repressed it in an effort to protect itself, and therefore you would not know that this has happened to you without the regression therapy that Barbara Snow provided. Almost every report of satanic abuse has been found through this memory regression technique. These memory regression sessions have been largely dismissed and debunked by modern psychology, but at the time it resulted in tens of thousands of innocent parents, relatives, and close family friends being accused of perpetrating this satanic abuse and being Satanists, when no such thing could be proven. Now, of course, the default position should always be to believe victims whether or not their claims can be proven, but this was different because the victims did not know that they were victims until they'd had this so-called memory regression, and it seemed more likely that Barbara and her associates had been implanting and creating these memories during the sessions rather than having their clients organically remembering something that actually happened to them. Barbara was known to ask pressing questions and convince people, usually children, that they were remembering something. She would dismiss their doubts and instead press to encourage them to elaborate on increasingly bizarre and horrific claims. In a 1994 New York Times article that conducted the first empirical study on these allegations of satanic rituals, they claimed that of the 12,000 accusations of this abuse that they investigated, not one could be substantiated with evidence. The survey found that there was not a single case where there was clear corroborating evidence for the most common accusation, that there was a well-organized intergenerational satanic cult who molested and tortured children in their homes or schools for years and committed a series of murders. So why am I telling you this? Well, Teal Swan grew up in Utah in a rural Mormon community, and her backstory is all based off being abused by a man who she calls Doc, who she says was part of a satanic cult. And from the age of 6 up until she was 19 years old, she says that she was a victim of this satanic ritual abuse. abuse. And Barbara Snow herself was Teal's therapist during the early 2000s when Teal was in her early 20s and had just escaped this alleged cult. But before we go further into this rabbit hole, I want to take a quick moment to thank my sponsor for this video, 𝘀𝗵𝘁. Did you know your personal data is being bought and sold online right now? Data brokers collect your information, your name, your address, your phone number, even details about your relatives, and sell it to anyone willing to pay. They can also package it all together to create profiles or listings pretending to be you with your personal information. This means that strangers, scammers, or even potential stalkers could access your private details with just a few clicks. 𝘀𝗵𝘁 is a subscription service that removes your personal data from hundreds of these data broker websites. Every few months, 𝘀𝗵𝘁 privacy experts scan the web for your information and get it removed, and then send you a detailed report showing exactly what they found and where they deleted it. I signed up for 𝘀𝗵𝘁, and within a week, I got my first privacy report showing how many sites had my data, and it turns out there were companies who had my name, age, address, phone number, past addresses, and even my relatives' names and my property value. 𝘀𝗵𝘁 then reached out to these companies on my behalf and had my information removed, and they repeat this process periodically and continually make removal requests on your behalf. If you want to see how much of your information is floating around the internet, head to joindeleteme.com/uncle and use my promo code UNCLE at checkout for 20% off all plans. Thank you again to 𝘀𝗵𝘁 for sponsoring this video and for helping me and my subscribers stay safe online.
So I would wake up 3:22 a.m., walk out to the end of the driveway, and he'd pick me up and we'd go do these cult rituals. So I'll explain this person. The context of my childhood isn't going to make sense unless I do that, because the particular man who was what they call my keeper in this group had multiple personality issues, like big ones, where one minute you'd call him by one name and he wouldn't even know who you were talking to, and then he'd have these, so basically he had these, like a personality which I would often call Doc, who was like the all-knowing, the one that most people in the society saw. And he was like a really educated, super charismatic, your typical sociopath type of a person who could have just pulled one on anybody. He was really friendly, really charming, super handsome. So that was that personality. The other personality, which he called 𝘀𝗵𝘁, ironically, was like super evil and was part of these satanic groups.
Teal Swan claims that she was abused and tortured by a man who was part of a satanic cult. She claims to have seen children sacrificed before her eyes. She claims to have been sex trafficked, drugged, and taken away in her sleep to satanic rituals, and has done many lengthy public interviews about her story. In 2006, Barbara Snow filed a police report against Teal's abuser claiming satanic ritual abuse, but this case was later closed due to lack of evidence. Now, I must be careful here because I'm aware that I just talked about the history of satanic panic and Barbara Snow and basically dismissed it all, and now I have these clips of Teal Swan describing her trauma, which is incredibly similar to the kind of memory regression stuff that was dismissed. I think it's important to note here that I'm not saying Teal is definitely making up her story, because when a victim comes forwards with these details, I do want to believe them. I obviously don't know if it's true, or if parts of it are true and other parts are exaggerated. You can come to your own conclusion, but it is interesting to look at the facts. You see, Teal herself claims that these memories were never repressed. She seems to be the only person in this satanic panic who remembers everything without having to do memory regression, and that she was aware of all of this abuse before meeting Barbara Snow.
They went to work like bleeding me, doing all kinds of like horrific stuff to try to get me to come back to Christ. So my childhood, from age what I consider 6, even though technically it started beforehand, that was when I really consider like the end of my childhood, when I got brought into them and I really didn't belong to my parents anymore. All the way to 19, I was with these groups, and specifically with this man. Now, when you are part of a lot of these groups, and now we're talking satanic specifically, what they'll do is they'll assign somebody like me. They call me an oracle. An oracle is a role where somebody has the ability to access the underworld or whatever. So we oracles are not actually allowed to take care of ourselves at all.
However, a once close friend of Teal was interviewed for the Gateway podcast, which is a 6-episode investigation into Teal Swan by Jennings Brown, which I highly recommend and will link below. And in this interview, Tori explains that Teal tried to convince her that they had known each other before and had both been victims of the same cult. Tori was referred to Barbara Snow by Teal, who said that Barbara would help her remember. Tori then claims that Barbara tried to tell her things about her childhood that were not true.
We got in a fight because she was telling me these things that were insane. She began to start telling me that I had actually grown up with her and that I was a part of this cult that she had been experiencing. That we met when we were at this ritual in the woods, in the mountains. It was like a child sacrifice. And she would kind of say things like, do you remember the trees? Do you remember the fire, the people? And I'm like, no, like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's insane. She just said that there was a lot of work that I needed to do because I was repressing all of these memories of being abused to the degree that she says that she had been abused. So we just got in this argument that ended with me just being in tears because I'm like, I care about you as a friend, but I can't grasp this. I don't understand what you're doing here, why you're telling me this, and why you're trying to convince me so much that this thing happened. So finally she just wrote down on a piece of paper, Barbara Snow.
Another childhood friend of Teal's came forward on a podcast and claimed that Teal had also convinced her that she had repressed memories that she needed to uncover.
Well, and even though you didn't recover a memory, I imagine you were still brainstorming a lot of potential scenarios that could have, the thoughts are always there in your mind. You're still exposing your brain constantly to images of you being abused almost, even though you know that you're just brainstorming.
You look through every aspect of your life and question it, and then you don't know your life anymore. There's what's real, what's not real. You lose your life trying to find things that weren't there in your life. That you kind of die a little inside from it.
So in my eyes, it's very possible that Teal did not have any memory of this satanic abuse until meeting Barbara Snow. And if it was Barbara Snow who supposedly uncovered these memories of Teal's, I would have more reason to believe that Teal was a victim of Barbara's false memories. But this backstory is key to Teal's selling point, because since Teal has suffered all of this horrific abuse and has come out as a functioning and healed human being, it gives other people who are suffering or have suffered hope that they too can be healed.
My life path was one of extreme suffering. The worst kind of suffering that you can experience as a physical human. And that teaches you a lot. And it gets you out of a lot of boxes and a lot of paradigms, and you have to figure it out. And so by virtue of combining the information that I have that most people don't have access to because of their perceptual incapacities, and also the fact that I suffered my ass off and had to find a way to create solutions for it, I have now evolved into a person who does have many of these answers.
Now, there have been 2 documentaries made about Teal Swan. The one that I referred to in the introduction is called The Deep End and came out in 2022. This one Teal does not like, as it depicts her as a potentially harmful cult leader. But there was a documentary made in 2017 that paints her in a much more favourable light. It was an independent project, meaning it was produced without the influence of a major network, and so unlike the Hulu documentary, which had the resources to bring in external voices and a broader range of perspectives, this earlier film was created with a more controlled narrative. In the 2017 documentary, Teal takes us through her childhood diaries. At just 8 years old, she was writing that she had been abused. I think that this documentary solidified my own opinion for me, which is that regardless of whether or not what Teal has been through is in any way related to a satanic cult, I do think it's clear that she's been through something in her childhood and was evidently suffering.
You don't see what you are doing. Child abuse. Crazy, right? That picture was taken of me when I was 6 years old. The exact year that I was inducted into the cult.
She also details in this documentary that having escaped a cult herself, the most harmful thing that people can say about her is that she's leading a cult. She claims that she empowers and does not force anybody to follow her beliefs.
Also wish that people knew more about the criteria for a cult. What I do is empower the individual. That is the exact opposite of what a cult can do. In fact, a cult can't exist unless one person is empowered and the rest of them are unempowered. Besides, teaching people to trust themselves, that's your recipe for loss of control. So unless I'm the worst cult leader that ever existed,
So Teal has been battling with cult allegations as far back as 2017, which was somehow 8 years ago, even though it feels like yesterday. So let's look into her teachings and why she's been so controversial for so long. In 2012, Teal's first one-on-one client took her own life. For the sake of this video, I'll call this client Joanne. Joanne had been struggling with depression for many years. After seeking help through traditional routes and taking antidepressants, she sought out Teal Swan for alternative therapy. Through Teal's one-on-one sessions, she uncovered suppressed memories of extreme childhood trauma involving her father. Joanne's husband was also a follower of Teal and claims that Teal told him that he had been married to her in a past life. We don't know why Joanne took her own life and what role Teal may or may not have played in it, but it did spark a larger conversation about the dangers of the way that Teal speaks about death and the decision to end one's life. Teal asks her followers to sit with the idea of dying, to visualize it, and because she believes in reincarnation, she promotes the idea that to take your own life is to hit a reset button. She will tell you that she is braver than traditional psychology because she confronts people with these thoughts head on and asks them to sit with them rather than telling them platitudes. But many mental health professionals have called Teal's methods reckless and harmful. Teal rejects traditional psychology and therefore has no qualifications or license in this field. She claims that she does not need one as she has divine knowledge and experience and is not healing people in ways that can be researched via traditional academic routes. However, in 2017, she did receive a cease and desist from the state of Utah for attempting to practice mental health therapy without a license. The fine was never paid, and around this time, Teal Swan relocated to Costa Rica to start running her retreats there. This was a direct result of a video where Teal Swan takes a client through her completion process. Now, the completion process is Teal Swan's signature method of healing. She has written books about it and claims that this is the best way to heal trauma. Teal believes that all mental ailments and some physical ailments are a result of childhood trauma that you may not even remember until you do her completion process. Sounds a little similar to our friend Barbara Snow. And it is, in my opinion. The process involves asking what your bad feelings are currently or when you were last triggered. You're then asked when in your memory you first felt these feelings. This is almost always when the person was a child. Teal will then ask you to embellish as much as you can in this scene in which you were a child, and more often than not there will be a parent present who is mistreating you in some way and causing you to feel this feeling. You then relive this trauma, sit with the emotion, and you're supposedly on the path to releasing that emotion. As Teal claims to know you better than yourself, she's able to get your repressed memories out, and so people clamor to get one of these sessions with her. She holds seminars and retreats where people can go through this with her or with one of her inner circle. You see, you can become a certified completion process practitioner by taking one of her courses, and the people that take this course then become almost Teal's disciples. Many of them live with Teal and join her on her retreats, whilst others return home to practice the completion process remotely. It is these disciples who I believe are the ones in Teal's cult. You see, the people that follow Teal online and visit her retreats and seminars or take part in her Facebook group are all dedicated followers, but they are not within close enough proximity to be fully in a cult. They may be influenced, they may be worshipping Teal and holding her in the same high regard as one might hold a religious deity, but you could say the same thing about K-pop stans and their idols. I'm not accusing Teal Swan of being a cult leader on a global scale, but rather in the way that she controls the disciples that she keeps in her close circle. This is where the true cult starts to emerge. Teal lives on a compound with her closest followers who all work for her in some capacity in exchange for room and board. Many of these people have come to her in their time of need and are completely dedicated to her cause. She jokes in one interview that she has found a group of codependent people.
There seemed to be a type of innocence and kindness both.
Super codependent people.
So how did...
But this is not a joke. She has actively created a group of people who are completely codependent. They are dependent on her, and she is dependent on them for creating and upholding her Teal Swan empire. These are often vulnerable people who have nowhere else to go, and whose entire purpose becomes Teal Swan.
Did you ever think, what if she's lying, or could this be false, or...
No, because I'm in so much pain, and I'm holding, I'm feeling so bad, and she has the answers that I'm holding myself hostage to all this. I'm forcing myself. This is the way.
Because you're desperate.
I'm desperate.
For
yeah.
what?
This is Jared. Jared came into Teal's life as a vulnerable, desperate man who had just left his wife and child and the Mormon church. He found spirituality and Teal Swan, and they became close. Before long, he was living in her compound with her closest followers and helping her out with her website and her business. Teal was married at the time, but told Jared that she and him were meant to be together. Eventually, Teal cheated on her husband with Jared and began a relationship with him, and her husband slowly got kicked out of the picture. Like many in Teal's inner circle, Jared was given a new name, and to her, he was known as Fallon. We can see that many of Teal's followers will adopt new names once they become associated with her, as 𝘁cie proudly tells the camera in the 2022 documentary.
My actual legal name is Matthew.
Are you familiar with Teal's work?
No, I
both Teal and I at the same time were like, something feels so different to where like my name doesn't even feel like it matches me anymore. Like that's some other identity. And then we came up with this name together.
This is a classic way to isolate people from their lives before joining a cult. To give them a new name and a new identity allows them to fully integrate into this new way of life and leave any community that they were a part of before behind. Jared has now come out of the cult of Teal Swan and told his story on the Mormon Stories podcast, which I will link below. The interview was very telling. Jared spoke about Teal's repressed memory techniques and how during these sessions he felt like he had to say what she wanted him to say.
What she said is like, okay, I'm going to teach you how to uncover your repressed memories. Lie down and let your brain show you whatever your
brain comes up with.
Yeah, and so you make up these fanciful, horrific tales of all sorts of disgusting, disturbing things, and you do it for hours and hours, and you build upon this narrative that gets bigger and longer.
Why did she feel like you needed to do this?
Because I had to learn who I really was. But really, she was all about monitoring, controlling what I said and who I said it to, and like if I was on the phone with someone, I was on speaker, and everyone was listening in, and she'd just be like, "See, like he is evil or whatever, just like all sorts of stuff." And she wanted me to cut out my family, but in like a backhanded way of like, they're not good for you.
Jared also claims that he heard Teal expressing concerns that she was worried that people would find her out as a fraud.
Yeah, so like she's like, everyone's gonna know I'm a fraud. Everyone's gonna know I'm.
What would lead to her saying that? What would be the situation?
I think being tired and just moments of honesty. It was late at night and just moments of honesty. Like
she would say, "What?
I'm afraid everyone's gonna know that I'm a fraud, that I'm fake."
And Jared is just one of many. Another devout follower, Andy, made a video on his experience of Teal's inner circle and claims that it functions like a cult.
It's a weird one because it doesn't look or act like a regular cult in a lot of senses. Like it is a cult and it does fit the criteria, but it does in a kind of roundabout way. So it's easy for example, Teal to say, I have the perfect recipe for a cult, but it's not a cult because of my ethics, which, I mean, that's a whole other can of worms.
So if those that have been in Teal's circles say that it's a cult, and her critics say that it's a cult, is it a cult? Well, Teal will tell you that these people are her haters, and that people only label her as a narcissist and a cult leader because she's a powerful woman.
People always say about women who step up into these powerful positions, especially in the world, especially if they're pretty, that they're narcissistic. Like, I have to be honest with you, and I do need to bring this up at this point. There is nothing more difficult than being a woman in a powerful position in this world today.
So, with all of these allegations and concerns bubbling beneath the surface, a documentary crew began following Teal and created a 4-part documentary for Hulu, which many viewers now take as evidence that Teal is in fact running a cult, despite Teal's constant efforts to debunk it. In 2022, a 4-part documentary series called The Deep End was released on Hulu, providing a detailed look inside of Teal Swan's world. Whilst Teal Swan repeatedly rejects the idea that she runs a cult, many of the red flags are pretty present in this documentary, perhaps the most prominent being the way that she appears to isolate people from their families and insists that they replace them with her and her compound. The documentarians hired a private investigator to investigate claims that Teal Swan was running a cult, and when the investigator found a document of non-negotiables that Teal required of her followers, she concluded that it was indeed a cult-like organization, if not a full-on cult.
And then I was given a document that I was shocked that they were shared with me, which is called the non-negotiables. And this is a list of the things that people have to agree to if they're going to be part of this inner circle. And it does not read well. Yeah. Good. I'm not sure if you're aware, but Matthias shared with me the document called the non-negotiables. And can you answer some questions about that?
I don't know. I don't have them in front of me, but I haven't read them in a while.
Okay. Well, it's you can't put your own family first. The Teal has to come first. If she wants you there, she gets you. The priority of the entire community is whatever's in the best interests of Teal. Everything else is second to that. You can't have personal boundaries that have in any way an effect on Teal. So here's how this one's written. You will now be in the world of fame. This makes relationships very, very complicated and often painful. Your associations are, in fact, your potential biggest liability.
The documentary as a whole is interesting. It mostly focuses on Teal's relationship with her day one supporter, Blake. Blake is a man who Teal claims saved her when she escaped the satanic cult at 19. They formed a romantic relationship that lasted about a year before deciding to just be friends, and they have remained living together ever since, with Blake helping Teal film her videos and run her business for nearly 2 decades. Blake has lived with Teal through 5 marriages, has helped raise her son, and has been with her from the very start. That is, until now. He began a relationship with 𝘁𝗓, who he got married to, and the documentary follows 𝘁𝗓 trying to be integrated into Teal's compound, and then Teal not liking her and eventually basically kicking Blake and 𝘁𝗓 out of the compound. The documentary is very much framed as if Teal does not let people join or leave her inner circle very easily, and there's even a moment where she states that the people in that circle cannot have relationships or children if they want to remain.
I feel like what we need to do as team members is choose what consequences we say yes to upon bringing a partner into this circle.
Yeah. Basically, what this boils down to is I need to be able to get rid of you if you bring somebody close that's dangerous to me.
Yeah.
I can't be kept awake at 3 o'clock in the fucking morning before an interview by a screaming baby.
All the girls here are on board. We're not having kids.
We need to write this down. I want this to be part of the contract.
What most people picked up on was Teal's relentless behaviour towards 𝘁𝗓 and the way that she would come at her in front of a group of people. And then how this rudeness was reflected onto Blake once he made the difficult decision to leave her compound. Teal has since attempted to discredit the documentary, claiming that she was misrepresented and that the filmmakers had an agenda to make her look bad. But for many viewers, the deep end simply confirmed what ex-followers had been saying for years, that Teal Swan is not just a YouTuber giving spiritual advice, she's a cult leader, and I don't really think you can edit around how truly mean and manipulative Teal was to Blake and his wife, and the fact that Blake, her closest friend of nearly 20 years, was kicked out because he began a relationship with an outsider.
If you want to flip the favor around, like you guys have been doing to me, the level of fucking judgment you have on me being a narcissistic bitch, you're a fucking absolute loser. Always will be. Do you think I control others, even the way they see things? You think I'm too masculine, too harsh, not very nice, don't care about people, manipulate Blake? I'm tyrannical, have the wrong values, use people. I hurt myself and others. I'm power hungry and responsible for the power struggles between you and me. I want everyone for myself. I surround myself with enablers, that I'm very powerful, that I'm very talented, that I have a very meaningful mission. How conflicting. Yeah, this is what you've been doing since the minute you landed. You keep insulting me. It's all over your energy field. So I suggest you talk about that.
What do you feel when you hear that, 𝘁𝗓?
Because if you're not aware, you have the smirk on your face.
A smirk? No, I'm afraid, actually.
Teal has posted multiple videos telling her followers that this documentary was propaganda, but none of this really focuses on the issues that most people had with her behaviour, which was 1, the way she treated Blake and 𝘁𝗓, and 2, the contract that the private investigator found. She claimed that this was all cut together to create a story that didn't happen.
They used trick editing, fake narratives, conversations taken out of context, and used all of us, Blake and 𝘁𝗓 included, to tell a story they must have intended to tell from minute 1. Because none of it happened as they showed you.
Ironically, I dare say that the completion process and memory regression techniques also cut together stories that never happened, but that's just my opinion. But as many of the comments say, no matter how it's edited, she still said all of those harsh words and humiliated 𝘁𝗓. In every commentary video that she has done on the documentary, she explains that she can't go into detail debunking every single thing because her commentary would be longer than the episode itself.
To go point by point over all the things that are not accurate or are not truthful is not possible. This commentary video would be longer than the episode itself.
But in a landscape where hour-long plus videos really thrive on YouTube, I find it a strange excuse. If she really had the tools to debunk the entire thing, surely she could just make a video longer than a 40-minute episode. It doesn't really make much sense as an excuse. Your followers would happily watch a movie-length video if that's what it took to convince them that what they saw was not a controlling, abusive, behind-the-scenes environment. My final thought on the documentary is that Teal Swan claims to have access to the Akashic records. These records are believed to be the compendium of all universal events. This means that she can see the past, the present, and the future of all entities and life forms, and every thought that's ever been had and ever will be had. So my question is, if she can see the future, surely she can see the consequences of the events that are to play out. Why would you agree to do this documentary if you already knew that they would form this narrative and that people would turn against her? Surely she would have known that they were going to use this documentary to try and prove that she was involving people in a cult. Or perhaps her powers are not what she says she are, and she is manipulating people into building her an empire for free. Because many of these people are volunteers who work for room and board while Teal pockets millions of dollars. Even if she's not keeping them there with force, she's certainly making it difficult to leave. Because where will they go if they want to leave the compound? If their only qualification is a completion process certificate from an unlicensed practitioner, they have no money of their own, they have no people outside of this circle to support them, they're known by a new name, they're often convinced that their family members traumatized them early in life, their survival is completely dependent on Teal Swan. And I believe that she knows that, and she uses that to manipulate people. Whether or not Teal Swan intends to run a cult, the results speak for themselves. She's built a devoted following that sees her as infallible. She encourages people to reject outside influences. There is no denying that she has control over her inner circle's lives, whether or not she wants to admit it. There's also no denying that her videos have helped people. I think there is a key difference here between the people who seek answers in her YouTube videos because they are desperate and cannot afford therapy, and the people who go above and beyond and pay thousands of dollars for her retreats and get admitted into her inner circle and to her compound. That's where the real danger lies. When vulnerable people attach themselves to Teal in this way, Teal will tell you that she can't help that people attach themselves to her, but you can help running a compound where everyone that has attached themselves to you does a bunch of free labor so that you can run an internet empire. That's taking advantage of vulnerable people. That's borderline, if not a complete cult. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. I have been your Uncle Herman, and thank you again to 𝘀𝗵𝘁 for sponsoring this video.